Hey, everybody. Welcome to Live Your Best Midlife. This is a special live edition. We are talking about a very important topic today, women's heart health. And it is my pleasure to welcome our guest, Dr. Bal Pawa. Hi, Dr. Pawa.
Hello. Hi. Nice to see you again, Shirley.
Thank you so much for jumping on here with us today. I do want to get right into this very important topic. If you have not heard Dr. Pawa speak on Menopause Chicks before, let me just quickly introduce you to one of my dearest teachers. She has been so influential in the learning journey that I've been on for the last 9 years. She is an integrative physician, a pharmacist, co-founder of the West Coast Women's Clinic, a hormone balance expert, recently a new author of her book, The Mind Body Cure. And if you Google Dr. Pawa's name right now, you're going to see her on all sorts of media, TV, and radio. And so it really is our pleasure to welcome you back to Menopause Chicks. You and I chatted a couple of weeks ago. February is Heart Month. But the heart, I mean, my goodness, can we really just reserve 1 month to talk about it? This is so important. So let's dive in. What do you want women to know about their heart health?
Thanks, Shirley, and thanks for your kind words. The heart is so important. We always talk about women's health and hormones and breast cancer, but heart disease is still the #1 killer. Breast cancer is number 6. So in Canada, 31,000 women are going to die of heart disease every year, and that's death. But then there's so much mortality associated with it as well, morbidity and mortality. So I think it's really important for women to know what they can do, what are their risk factors, and what do they need to do to prevent heart disease. So that's what we'll talk about today.
Sure. So you have some fun facts, you said. What are the fun facts about our heart?
Well, if you think about the heart, Shirley, everybody knows that the songs, the songwriters, your heart can see things that your eyes can't see. Thinking about Aristotle way back, and he always thought the seat of the soul was in the heart. So the heart comes up all the time in poetry and in our nuances. We say, for example, your show, Cross Your Heart, that's to do with truth and follow your heart, and home is where the heart is. And so heart is referenced all the time, but it's more than just a glorified pump. We think of this heart pumping 100,000 beats a day, and it pumps blood to all our tissues, but it's more than a pump. And in my research, I found out that the heart is actually fascinating stuff I didn't learn in medical school.
Wow.
That it's got its own nervous system. It can make hormones. Who would have thought about the heart as an organ that could do that?
Wow. I mean, thanks for mentioning Cross Your Heart too, because one of the sayings that comes up a lot with the women in our community is that so often we're told, or not told, but it's inferred, cross your fingers and hope for the best, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of how personally I've addressed my own heart health. Like my dad had heart disease. He had his first heart attack at 52. I just turned 54. But really, what have I done about that? I've crossed my fingers and kind of hoped that won't be my story, right? And so I want women to uncross our fingers and to really listen to your wisdom and the truth about heart health. And, you're right. It is sort of this image, this artistic, glorified part of our vocabulary and our society. But are we really paying enough attention to preventing heart disease or optimizing our heart health?
Well, if you think about it, Shirley, women's health and women's heart disease has been on the back burner. You look at all the drugs for hypertension and heart. Have they ever been studied in women? No. Do you know that all the studies on heart drugs were done in men? You know that old saying about 2 drinks of wine are good for your heart? That study was done in men. So we actually haven't studied women and heart disease. And so I'm really glad that you're bringing it to the forefront. And a few years ago, the Heart and Stroke Foundation had me speak at one of their events when we used to meet together.
Yeah.
And it was the Red Dress campaign. And then really brought to the forefront. And we were shocked as physicians when we uncovered that, first of all, women, okay, they don't recognize heart disease and symptoms and they delay going to the hospital. But when they get to the emergency, we doctors were guilty of not paying attention to women. If a man came in and said he had chest pain, right away, they got the EKG, they got the monitors, they were whipped in right away. But women were delayed in getting the care and attention they needed. So there was a delay in the emergency, but there was also a delay with women because they didn't recognize their symptoms, or they said, oh, I got to put one more load of laundry in before I call the ambulance. They kind of were in denial about their symptoms. So now with the Red Dress campaign, the Heart and Stroke Foundation, we've raised a great deal of awareness in the emergency room. So that's been much better. And now we're trying to raise awareness to the public. And this is what you're doing now, bringing this to the women. This is such an important topic.
Right. Okay. So let's divide this conversation into two parts.
Okay.
Let's talk prevention first before the emergency room. And then, secondly, I hope that you can identify some of the key differences for a woman who might be experiencing heart disease or heart attack.
Okay, so when you talk about prevention, we have to know a bit of background, right? So we have to know what are risk factors if we're going to prevent heart disease. Well, who's at risk? And men and women are at equal risk after menopause, but before menopause. So this is interesting.
Yeah.
Before menopause, we rarely see a woman in the ICU or in the CCU. A woman who's menstruating is somewhat protected because estrogen gives us a little bit of protection. It helps our cholesterol profile. It makes our good cholesterol rise and it makes our bad cholesterol go down. So estrogen has that protection. And estrogen also protects what we call the endothelial cells, or the tiny little blood vessels, to keep them open. So it helps with your nitric oxide. It helps with dilation. So estrogen confers protection. We know that. But after menopause, then men and women were on equal playing fields. And in fact, if women get heart attacks, they actually have a poor recovery time compared to men. So after menopause, it's not just the equal numbers, but there's a change in the way that women recover. Men recover better than women after menopause. Women are at a higher risk. So that's important. Knowing your risk factor, if you have diabetes, if you have high cholesterol or triglycerides, if you have high blood pressure, that's a big one. And Shirley, the waist hip ratio, that's something that women can do at home. Measure your hip and measure your waist. And your ratio should be that your waist should be less than 35 inches for women.
Okay.
And for men, it should be less than 40. So your waist should be smaller than your hip. If your waist is bigger than your hip, you're at a risk for heart disease.
Right.
So those are some of the risk factors. Of course, smoking, being overweight, not exercising. And for women, they put stress in there.
I wanted to ask you about that.
Yeah, that's a big stress factor. Women get overwhelmed. They have elder care, child care. They feel very overwhelmed, whereas men say that they're most stressed about their work. But women are stressed about, because they're more the caregivers and nourishing and providing all kinds of responsibility for others. They tend to respond more to emotional triggers, whereas men, when we see them in emergencies, usually after a snowstorm, they've been shoveling the driveway or they lifted something heavy. So they get what we call obstructive heart disease, and women often get these spasms after emotional, if someone, there was a big stress in their household, their kid got into an accident or their house, flooded. Women tend to respond more emotionally. In fact, our cardiac nervous system is much more robust in women. That's connected to our brain. The nerves going from our heart to the brain are greater in women. So
Right.
it's interesting, isn't it? Yeah.
And something I learned from you, in the Mind Body Cure, is we as women can feel our stress in our heart. And that can be, send you to the ER and go through a battery of tests, and there be no blockage or evidence of heart disease, but you're actually physically having a response to stress in that part of your body.
Yeah, so that's the thing. Women present very differently than men too. Our hearts are different, and that anatomically, if you look at a man's heart, it's thicker, the walls are thicker, the muscles are thicker, the arteries are bigger, so they pump out more blood. But a woman's heart beats faster than a man's,
Hmm.
and our anatomy is a little different. So our symptoms are going to show up differently. Men get that crushing central chest pain, right? It's so
Right.
typical. Whereas women say, yeah, it's a bit, a bit uncomfortable, and they might get pain going to their jaw, or they might say they got heartburn or
Mhm.
digestive symptoms. So men and women present differently.
I need to take us back to something you said just a couple of minutes ago, and that is how estrogen protects our heart. So I know that this might be a larger conversation than what we have time for today, but I think it's really important for our listeners to start their learning and research in this area. And what I'm about to say is, for generations, for the last few decades, we've been taught to fear hormone therapy because of what you mentioned, that fear of cancer, breast cancer in particular. And what if the question isn't the risk of hormone therapy, but the risk of not pursuing hormone therapy because of its protective qualities?
Yeah, so we got to make a distinction. The estrogen that you produce when you're having periods, that's definitely very protective. So because of that, about 30 years ago, they started putting everybody on Premarin and Provera, thinking, oh, it's going to protect their heart. What we now know is that yes, estrogen can be protective, but if you take oral estrogen or oral Premarin, oral any kind of birth control pills, you're actually making your blood thicker and more prone to stroke and heart attacks and blood clots. So you have to be careful with what estrogen is going in. So you want to make sure that the estrogen that you do take is at the right time. The timing is really important. We call it the window of opportunity.
Right.
So when you first go into menopause, within those 18 months, if you were started on hormone therapy, you would probably have more of a protective risk for the estrogen. But if you're 65 and you waited 10 or 15 years and say, well, now I want to start hormones, not a good idea, because
Right.
now you might have established plaque in your arteries. So timing is important. Secondly, you want to know that the estrogen you use should be through the skin. So you want to use molecularly identical estrogen to your own. So put it through the skin, because when you put it through the skin, you're not going to change the proteins in your blood that would make it thicker and more prone to blood clots and heart attacks and strokes. So it's really important to get an individualized risk assessment with your doctor and say, well, what's my blood pressure? If the blood pressure is high, maybe we shouldn't. What's the cholesterol? What's your body weight? So there's a number of factors. And if you're a good candidate, then yes, you can have benefits of hormone therapy. It'll protect your brain, protect your bones, gives you a good night's sleep, helps with vaginal dryness, and all of the other benefits if you're a good candidate.
That's amazing. So, do you have any case studies or any examples to share with us?
I have a couple of examples. They're really interesting, and this is just from this week.
Oh, really?
I had a 52-year-old, and 8 months ago was her last period. So she's 52, and she was sent to our clinic because they want to know, should she go on hormones? Her blood pressure is 140 on 90. Her father had a heart attack. Okay, so we said, okay, well, let's assess her. So when we looked at her, blood pressure was high on exam. She was having terrible hot flashes. And we thought hot flashes are just a nuisance, but hot flashes are not good because it's like a little mini cardiac event each time. And so we looked at her body mass index and it was 27. So she's overweight. Her waist was bigger than her hips. Her cholesterol was mildly elevated. So now the question is, she's 8 months from her period. The timing is right. If we're going to put her on estrogen, we have to do it fairly soon. And is she a good candidate? So what I did was I had a talk with her. I said, here are your risks, here are your benefits. So the risks are you need to really modify. You can't change your genetics, but here are some things you can change. You can change the way you exercise. You can
Right.
change your waist hip ratio. You can lower your cholesterol with diet. So a lot of lifestyle changes can be made and you lower your risk and then you get the benefit of the hormones. So then that's what she agreed to do. She really wanted the quality of life and the sleep and all the benefits from the hormones. But obviously, I didn't want to put her in harm's way.
Right.
So she's got a 3-month trial on the hormones. We'll monitor her blood pressure, and she's going to join a gym, work with a personal trainer, work with our nutritionist at the clinic, and then we'll reassess the situation. And if she's able to lower her risk for heart disease, we can continue the hormones for longer.
That's amazing. I wish her continued health in that. And I would really like to underscore for all our viewers and listeners what you said about hot flashes. Because I mean, if we can have that paradigm shift, that hot flashes are not something that we are supposed to suck it up or just endure or try to get through. But if you actually think about it as a mini cardiac event, that's going to put you, I hope, on the path to, better health and finding a health team to support your journey.
I think so. And hot flashes, when I first started the West Coast Women's Clinic, we were thinking about hot flashes and attending all these menopause conferences around the world. And we as physicians didn't think of hot flashes as anything but a nuisance, it's
Right.
just a nuisance. But now we look at hot flashes differently. It's a cardiac event and it's also a neurological event. So when we say heart attacks, we're also talking about strokes because when you get a heart attack, it's because there's not enough blood going to the heart. So we call it a heart attack. But if the same thing happens in the brain, we call it a stroke.
Okay.
So now we're seeing women who have severe hot flashes, more than 15 a day. They're at a greater risk for stroke and heart disease.
Wow.
So
Wow.
that's evolved over the last 10 or 15 years, the research. And now we pay a lot more attention and we treat the hot flashes more, not just as a nuisance, but because it can be many, many little events that are warning signs.
Wow, that is really important. And I'm wondering or assuming perhaps that what you said earlier about recovery for women from a heart attack, that applies to stroke as well.
Yes, it's probably we can infer from that it would be the same thing. That if women are caught early enough, then the recovery for heart attack or stroke is much better. So when you get your first symptoms, don't delay. It's better if you go to emergency and they say, "Oh, it was nothing. It was just stress and it was just anxiety. It wasn't a heart attack." We would rather you do that than to wait longer and actually have a stroke or a heart attack. So when you get the symptoms, the lightheadedness, take it seriously. Really pay attention to your body and take the time to call 911. Don't drive yourself.
Right.
Women tend to. Did you ever see this commercial with Rachel McAdams? And she's got 3 kids and she's about 48 and she's busy mom trying to get the kids out the door and she's clutching her chest, but all the while talking on the phone to her friend, preparing lunch for the kids, getting them in the car. And then, she didn't even think. And then she collapses on the floor. But before she does, she still has to get some dog food to put dog food in the dog thing before she calls 911. So it shows you how women will take care of everybody else, but they ignore their own symptoms. So if nothing else, remember, if you're having symptoms, we'd rather you err on the side of caution and go to emergency and let us be the judge of, was it a heart attack or not? Don't worry about stressing out doctors and the emergency. This is important.
Yes. Stop worrying about being an inconvenience.
Yes, and we do that.
Put yourself at the top of the list.
That's
And think, I mean, make today the day that you have a paradigm shift around hot flashes. Think of it as a tap on your shoulder that your body wants something. And then use that as a trigger to have a conversation with your physician, with Dr. Pawa and her team at West Coast Women's. I think that is really important learning for us. We have time for another topic that comes up a lot in the Menopause Chicks community, and that is around heart palpitations. Can you speak to that as it relates to women on their perimenopause to menopause journey?
Sure. Heart palpitations are a really common symptom around perimenopause and menopause. When estrogen levels drop, it changes our pacemaker. We have an automatic pacemaker in the heart called the SA node, and estrogen levels impact that. So when the levels drop off, they'll experience palpitations and they get arrhythmia. So women get more arrhythmias or abnormal rhythms than do men. And it's very common. But eventually when the levels even out, the palpitations go away. So we either fix them with hormone therapy, or if a woman is not a good candidate for hormone therapy, we have other means to stabilize the estrogen levels.
So if someone is experiencing heart palpitations, is ER the first point you want them to go to?
Well, especially, Shirley, if the palpitations are accompanied by shortness of breath. If it's just mild elevations, you feel a flutter, and maybe, you can just take some deep breaths, avoid coffee, do all that. But if you're getting palpitations and you're getting short of breath, or a little pressure in your chest, or something going up your jaw, it's better to go and get it checked. Definitely.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely rule out something more serious, and then pick up Dr. Pawa's book and learn how to breathe.
I wrote a chapter on the Mind Your Heart, and stress is a really big problem for women, as I was saying. But the other case I thought was really interesting: 62-year-old woman, she's on hormones already, and her husband, this is very sad, I'll just call her Mary, but 62 years old, and I got a call from emergency that Mary's had a heart attack. No blood pressure, no cholesterol, not overweight, works out, very fit. And I was really puzzled. But I knew that Mary had lost her husband about 6 months ago, tragically. They both just retired, and he was in a car accident on the way home from Coquitlam. So it was very tragic, and they were very attached, and Mary was heartbroken. So this is really interesting. And then I said, why is she getting a heart attack? She doesn't have risk factors. So when they sent me the report, it was really interesting. Her ultrasound, her echocardiogram of her heart showed that her heart had changed shape. It became like the shape of an octopus trap. And they call it Takotsubo's cardiomyopathy, broken heart syndrome.
Oh my goodness.
The poor woman was so distraught about her husband's death, of course, that her heart thinned out, changed shape, and then she experienced a heart attack because the blood supply wasn't getting to the heart. So I write about this in my book as well. Takotsubo's cardiomyopathy is a direct mind-body connection. Her emotional grief and trauma caused a change in the shape of the heart. And then eventually it went back to normal as we did counseling, as we gave her a lot of grief support, etc. Her heart actually went back to normal. But that was a really interesting case where women, internalize a lot of grief and trauma, but it can change. When you produce a lot of cortisol and adrenaline, it changes the anatomy and function of your heart, as well as many other organs too. But this was a classic case of mind-heart connection.
That is so fascinating, and no small coincidence that we use the term brokenhearted.
Yes, and they actually call it the broken heart syndrome, but the medical language is Takotsubo cardiomyopathy. And when I saw it on the ultrasound, I said, "My goodness, she didn't have any risk factors at all."
Wow. Wow, wow, wow.
Yeah.
I could talk to you all day. We would like to wrap this up by, I want to ask you about a word I used this morning on Instagram, and that word was invest. So often in women's health, we hear words like help and cure and fix. And this morning, I decided to stroke out those words and replace it with a word that's often used when we're talking about retirement or saving for our kids' education, and that's invest, but we don't always use it around women's health. So, what are your words of wisdom when it comes to investing in our health and maybe particularly our heart health?
Well, I have to tell you that it's an investment when you take care of your health, take charge of your health, become aware of your risk factors. That investment is going to pay you dividends
Mm.
beyond menopause. If we want to see you thrive with vim and vigor and longevity and health, and if you want vibrant health, then you have to invest the time and resources and energy. So remember, wherever your attention goes, energy flows. So put your attention on your intentions of how are you going to create health. So learn how to get some tools to create that health, create space. And when you invest in your health, everybody benefits, not just you, but your whole family benefits from it. So it's a great investment.
No kidding. Your family, your community, your workplace. Because I think you taught me we are the first generation of women to turn 50 and have 50 more years to plan for.
That's right. And we want quantity and quality. We want to live long. We're living longer than men, but we want to have the same quality as men do. So right up to the last day, we want to know that we're independent and healthy.
Amazing. Listen, Dr. Pawa, I know you have a very full day ahead of you. Thank you so much for taking time to chat with us on Live Your Best Midlife. And I look forward to seeing you soon.
Great. Thanks, Shirley. Thanks for doing great work. Bye. Have a good day.